place of refuge. We're going to be looking initially at Joshua 20, and I know what you're thinking if you were here last week. Rich, last week was spiritual marbles, and you didn't have any, or didn't have any of my pictures of marbles. What are you doing putting marbles back up there? Well, it turns out both lessons are related to marbles, and okay, I'm going to tell you right up front the twist. You've got to use both types of marbles today. You got to use your spiritual marbles, and then you got to use the marbles that get you by from day to day that doesn't necessarily work on spiritual, but works on, well, how does 1 + 1 = 2? Well, let's put it together. We're going to put together some parts of the Bible, unfortunately, we've overlooked. And so that's why we got the pictures of marbles that you'll see throughout this lesson. And the cool thing is, when you got all the marbles, then things make sense. You can play the game of marbles when you got them all. If you're mixing your shooter, that's the big one. That's the heavy one that knocks everything out of the way. You're in a bit of hurt because the game is based on how many of your marbles are in play and how many are getting knocked out. If you got it all, you're able to work with it. But it's not just having it all, it's having what you need for it to work out right. You've got to have it there all the way for it to really work out right. And as implied by the title, we're looking at the cities of refuge that occur in Joshua 20. Now, they're referenced earlier by Moses, but in Joshua 20, that's when these cities are actually set up. Reading verses 1 through 3, then the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, say to the Israelites, appoint the cities of refuge of which I spoke to you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person without intent or by mistake may flee there. They shall be for you a refuge from the avenger of blood. And, okay, we can understand accidents happen. And that's part of what's going on there. And all right, let's go ahead and look at the part that we tend to focus in on. Because when we think of that word refuge, we're thinking like the passage that was read before services this morning. I'm just going to pull out verse 3 of that. My God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold and my refuge, my Savior, you save me from violence. And when we think of that word refuge, because we're thinking in a Bible kind of context, we're thinking salvation, we're thinking shield, we're thinking about the things that are there to protect us, but they're protecting us in a very specific way when we're thinking about it inside the context of the Bible. And that's where I gotta let you know, we're missing one of our marbles. Because when we're looking at it sort of almost like the way we've always looked at it. We're conditioned to look at salvation a certain way. Because don't we tend to associate salvation with a sin problem? Think for a moment about what I read in Joshua chapter 20. Did I describe a sin that had occurred? No, I didn't. And it's not just Joshua chapter 20 where this occurs. Even in John, when there's the blind man, and the question from the apostles or disciples is, well, who sinned? And Jesus has to correct them. Hey guys, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's work might be revealed in him. And unfortunately, when we read through that, we're still missing that same marble. Because when we see that part, and yes, it's sort of hard to read part of that because that's not the part we're talking about, so that God's work might be revealed. We hear that and we think about that, but we think about that in the way we always tend to think about salvation, so that God's work might be revealed, but was it ever just miracles and a message? Was it just, I'm God, these are the things I want you to know and understand, and by the way, so that you can know it's me, God, sending you this message, here's the flash and the bang of it all. If you want flash and bang, if the whole sky lights up and goes through a full spectrum of colors, and you hear a big orchestra playing, ba 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 ba, and it goes on for 10 or 15 minutes, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it's heard the entire world over. Everybody's going to hear that. Everybody's going to know it's a God thing. And that has nothing to do with the missing marble, because that's just a sign. It's just a miracle. It would definitely be from God. That's not what was missing. John 3:16, for God so loved. And we read it, and we read it, and we quote it. But do we get it? That's the marvel that's been in play in ways we've never bothered to think about. Why was that man blind? Because of sin. Not because he sinned, not because his parents sinned, but because man sinned in the beginning. And because of that sin in the beginning, things became flawed. They became less than the good, that they were designed to be. Why? Because our sin needed something to correct it, needed something to draw us back to God. And in drawing us back to God, help us understand that need we had for that righter relationship with God. 1 Peter 3:21. And baptism, which this pre-configured now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God of or for, depending on your translation, a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Good conscience. We don't tend to talk about that one much. We talk about the do's and the don'ts, about getting right with God. What did Joshua 20 have to do with getting right with God? It didn't. If you make a mistake and somebody accidentally dies because of the accident that happened, and you happen to be the one holding the axe when the guy gets cut, God understood it wasn't your fault. A life's been taken. Somebody's going to be emotionally messed up over this. They're going to want to kill you. God got it. Here's a city of refuge for those times when sin has nothing to do with it. I'm providing you refuge. And just to get a bit clearer about where I'm going with this, Leviticus chapter 12. That's the passage where God says, and when a woman conceives and gives birth to a child, if it's a boy, when she delivers, she is ceremonially unclean for 30 days. And if it's a girl, she is ceremonially unclean for 60 days. All right, that word ceremonial is important. Because when a woman gives birth to a child, has she sinned? No. Is she unclean by her behavior? No. God is recognizing she just gave birth. She needs time. Time to recover, time with that child. 30 days of ceremonial uncleanness. You know what that means? If you're unclean, if you touch food, it's unclean. She can't cook for 30 days. Ha ha! And that's if it's a boy. And if it's a girl, she can't cook for 60 days. Because if she fixes it, nobody else can eat it. Somebody else needs to get in there and fix the food for her. Oh, wait, it's not just food this relates to. She can't touch the laundry. Because even if it's cleaned and she touches it, it's now dirty. So, she can't do laundry for 30 days or 60 days after having a child. She doesn't need to be doing the laundry. She gave birth, and that's awesome. She needs the time to spend with that child. And if it's a little girl, even more so. That's our God. He doesn't just put out there the do's and the don'ts. He doesn't just say, I love you and I'm fixing the sin thing. Even in his miracles, he was letting us know, hey, yes, I'm God. Yes, this is the truth. And oh, by the way, I love you and I'm showing it to you. Whether it was healing, whether it was feeding, or whether it was taking the time to put into the Word acknowledgement that, hey, you know what? I know things go wrong sometimes and you had nothing really to do with it. You tried to make sure everything was safe when you were cutting the wood. You made sure that there was the distance. You made sure nobody was in that circle of danger. But that wood was super, super wet. And when you hit it wrong, that handle and that whole thing just went ripping out of your hands and went flying in a direction nobody expected. And now somebody died. I mean, okay, nobody died in the example I can think of, but we were at a friend's house doing yard work for her. And another preacher friend of mine said, hey, can I borrow that axe? And I asked him, do you know what you're doing with it? And he goes, yeah, you swing it, you hit, it chops. I'm like, oh boy. I made sure all my kids saw the eye contact and everybody made sure we gave him the space. On his first swing, crack! The head of the axe so did not hit the log. The neck of the axe hit the log. Now, truth added into here as well, there was dry rot in this handle. I did not know that at the time because I was always hitting the right way. I couldn't tell yet. When he hit that wood that wrong way, it broke the head right off. I mean, poof, there it was. Fortunately, it went right down into the ground in front of it. He wasn't trying to cause it to happen. Did he have enough skill? No, not really. But that head coming off of that axe handle so wasn't intentional. God realizes that. And God has included in his word that kind of recognition. You mean like God knows us? Yeah, like God knows us. Like God realizes there's more to life than just the do's and the don'ts that we've got to work through? Yeah. Even when the thing we're working through is the birth of a little baby. That's the God we worship. Because if you take the time to think about any other religion out there, number one thing you'll usually hear about is, oh, well, the only religion that contains forgiveness in it is Christianity and Judaism to the extent that it included it. And yes, that's great. That's awesome. That's the salvation. I'm not dismissing that. What I am saying is, and what religion out there shows God's recognition of our humanity, of the things that we struggle with that don't really measure up to the issue of right and wrong, but we still got to deal with it. The struggles that we face that aren't issues of good and bad, that are the littler things, and sometimes they're itty bitty and cute. Our God recognizes that. Why? Because it's about love. It's about relationship. He offered that kind of refuge, and I mean both kinds. The refuge from sin. The refuge from the things that just go on, that we sometimes go, how in the world do I deal with this now? He offered that because he desires relationship. And the question is, are we going to leave him hanging? And just one other thought to carry into this. This goes back 30 years. A friend of mine said, hey, can you pray for my bird? It's not able to lay right now. I don't know what's going wrong. I think it's going to die. And a couple seconds, I'm sorry. No. This isn't something significant enough to bring before God. You don't need to say that prayer. I said, whoa, time out. For starters, this concerns you. You're upset because you're afraid this bird that you've got is going to die. And that's bothering you and distressing you. For starters, I'm your friend. If it distresses you, it means something to me. And you know what? We worship a God who understands our distress in ways sometimes we don't give him credit for. If it bothers you, it bothers me. Not because I care at all about a bird. I'm allergic to birds. I prefer not to have them around as far as the whole allergy thing goes. But because it concerns you, I'm concerned about the situation because I'm concerned about you. I'm praying for it, not because God's really worried about whether or not that bird lives or dies on the grand scheme of things. But just like I'm concerned about you, God's concerned about you too. There is nothing so little that God's saying, I don't care. Because if it was our own child and we said, well, I don't really care about that bird, what do we tell our kid? I don't care about you. Is that the kind of God who loves? No. That's the kind of God we find in the world. It's Zeus, it's Hera, it's Hercules, it's whoever and whatever that comes out of the mind of man. Because out of the mind of man, we get some crazy set of marbles going flying all over the place that have nothing to do with the real thing that's in play, but it's whatever I can make up. And in all of those make-ups, they left out forgiveness. In all of those make-ups, they left out a God who cares. Because is it love if he doesn't care? And the answer is already obviously no. Think about the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. All of that combined, not love is first. All of it together is the fruit of the Spirit. Because you want a God who loves but has no self-control? No. Because all of those things, if you think about it, we see manifest in God. Man messed up. Squish! That's the kind of gods you read about with the Greeks and so forth. It's time to take care of the problem. And by taking care of the problem, you squash it, and then you sweep it under the rug. Because while you may be God, you don't want anybody seeing the evidence of your mistake. God didn't make a mistake when he made Adam and Eve. God didn't make a mistake when he gave them the ability to choose. God didn't take away that ability to choose after they chose wrong. We don't disown our kids because they make a mistake. We work with them. We help them to grow. We do that in love. We do that because we care. We show them kindness, gentleness. We show them our self-control so they will grow up to do the same. We worship a God who, when you start to look at all the pieces, parts, you start to realize, if I leave out this marble, I really am missing something. If I leave out, and I'm not going to use, well, I'm going to say it and then I'm going to retract the word. If I leave out the humanity of God when I describe God, and I don't mean that us-wise, and I do. Meaning, if I leave out the fact that God cares about us in ways that the world tends to forget about when they talk about religion. Meaning, he cares about the woman who gives birth to a child. He cares about the person dealing with a situation that wasn't their cause, but it's so fallen on their head. When we suffer, he cares. He is there to be our refuge, not just in salvation. Because some days, to get by with all the nasty the world is throwing at you, not because you've sinned, but because we live in a sinful world, we need a refuge not from our sin, but from the world. He is there to offer us the peace that passes all understanding. When we accept the fact that, as Boone pointed out in class this morning, God is there ready to give. It's like Joshua. The promised land is given. Not, I'll give it when you are worthy. When you measure up. When you finally, become a good enough. The sacrifice was already made at Calvary 2,000 years ago. He's not waiting for each one of us to get it right. He acted first. It's up to us to respond to a God who, in ways sometimes we have overlooked, has shown himself to be loving and caring in a way we can so relate to. We can relate, and we need to respond. That response begins in baptism, as we've already covered in one of the slides, but it continues forward every day, because a marriage isn't just saying I do. It's the doing that occurs every day from that day forward in meaningful ways. And God cares in meaningful ways and is so ready to show us that through his love, through his word, if we're ready to accept. If you need to take Christ on in baptism, or you need the prayers of the church, you're more than welcome to come as we stand and sing.